Everything else in me felt quiet. I wished for sleep, but it didn't come. There was nothing but the waves, the waves, the waves. Finally, the gray light of morning touched the sky, and the air began to blush with a hint of pink, streaks of red, orange, purple rising behind the water. When it was finally fully morning, the world looked right again, except for the churning feeling I couldn't shake, that nothing could ever be the same. The doctors let us in out one at a time to see Father, who had come out of surgery back in early evening. He was doing well, they said. Mama went first and came out to looking refreshed. He's going to be all right, she said, touching my arm. It was my turn. There was a soft hum in the room, and the air smelled thick and warm, and Father was lying in the bed, his eyes closed. The heart monitor beeped on the side of the bed, and two thin tubes snaked out of Father's arm, connecting him to an IV stand. I moved up beside him, quietly in case he was sleeping. His fingers brushed against my hand. "Sam," he murmured. I could barely hear him. "You're all right." "I'm fine, Father. How do you feel?" "Sore. Where's your brother?" "I have no idea." "He's safe," I said. "He was here with us yesterday. He brought us to the hospital." Father's eyes closed. I thought he had fallen asleep, so I began to move away. "You scared me," he said, and I stepped closer. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for—" I choked on the words. My eyes began to ache, and I pressed my hands over them. I tried to concentrate on Leroy's words, but it didn't help. Father was lying there, hurt, because of me. "I'm sorry." "Sit here," he said, smoothing his hand against the sheet at his side. I lifted his hand carefully and sat down. He ran his fingers over the sleeve of my shirt and then held his hand rest on top of mine as he drifted off to sleep. I sat there for a while, feeling his fingertips against the back of my hand, letting the flutter of his eyelids tell me everything would be all right. When I came out, Stick was leaning against the wall across the hallway. For the first time in a long time, I was not even a little bit happy to see him. I turned away from him for a moment and then rubbed my eyes. "How is he?" "You can go in if you want." Stick shook his head. "He doesn't want to see me." "He asked about you." Stick pushed off the wall. "I came to pick you up. Leroy's expecting you. Are you ready?" I swallowed the surge of anger, but not all of it went down. "I was ready last night," I snapped. Why did he, too, think my life would run on his terms? I was old enough to make my own decisions. "Do you want to come or not?" "Tell me where and I'll get there myself." "Don't be stubborn." "It works for you. Where's Mama?" "I asked for Fred to take her home." "How did you manage that?" I said, but I didn't care what he'd done. I already hated it. That he could come back and in a minute put right everything I couldn't manage in his absence. His shadow seemed as big as Father's, and I was lost in a whole mess of gray. Stick started down the hall. I thought I might have to carry her to the car. "I can't believe you let her sit up all night." "Insult to injury." "She wouldn't have slept anyway," I said. Stick and I went out to the parking lot. The vigil keepers had gone home. The only evidence of their presence was a few wax-stained signs strewn across the pavement. Stick drove us away from the hospital, back down to the neighborhood, and we stopped in front of a tall apartment building. He cut the engine and sat there for a moment. His fingers drummed lightly against the wheel. "You look tired," he said. "You would be too if you've been sitting up all night." Stick did look exhausted, but I wouldn't have given him the satisfaction of acknowledging it. He nodded. "I could take you home instead. They'll understand." I opened the car door and got out without replying. Stick came around and led me into the building. I felt like a kid being walked to school, and I glared at the back of Stick's head, wishing I could do this on my own. The apartment was on the third floor, and we climbed the stairs quickly. Two guys I didn't recognize stood at the landing by the door, holding guns, and I moved close behind Stick as he greeted them. One of them opened the door, and Stick motioned me through. My gaze swept around the room, trying to absorb the sights, and the apartment was cluttered with tables and chairs, piled high with books and papers. The walls were plastered with posters and newspaper clippings and photographs, bombarding me with scenes from the life of the Panthers. Through a doorway ahead of me, a second room appeared, to contain more of the same. On the left wall surrounding the windows hung a huge curtain of African print cloth. Deep blue swirled among lighter shades like an ocean draped in sky. The room had a voice of its own, a scream of orange, a whisper of truth, and in the corner a murmuring cry. I released my breath. "Amazing, right?" Stick said in my ear. I couldn't answer him. I was busy drinking it all in, busy trying to understand the stirring in my chest. I'd never stood in this room before, but somehow I recognized it. Lester and Leroy were bent over a desk to my left, talking, and they turned when we came in. I looked to the right, and Maxie was standing there. I stepped back, bumping into Stick. "Hi, Sam," she said. "Hi, Maxie." She walked over. "I'm glad your dad is going to be okay." The bundle of dynamite burning in me suddenly diffused. She could do that somehow. Melt me when I was cold, cool me when I was too hot to handle myself. "Thanks." She stepped up and put her arms around me. I didn't know what else to do, so I hugged her back. It only lasted a few moments, and then she moved away, sitting at a table with her back to me. "Sam?" Leroy greeted me with a bump of his fist against my shoulder. "You made it." "I've got to get going," Stick said, moving towards the doorway. "You're leaving?" My heart sped up. If Stick left, I'd only be here because I wanted to be. "Raheem took over the shift," Leroy said. Stick turned, a flicker in his eyes. "I was going to cover it." "You've got bigger things today. Don't sweat it." Leroy went through the doorway to the second room, motioning for Stick to follow. I started to follow after them. "Not so fast," Lester said from across the room. "We'll be needing you in here." He pointed me towards the desk where Maxie was sitting, and I sat down in the chair she cleared off for me, but she didn't look at me or speak. She was tucking folded letters into envelopes, one after another, and then stacking them. "What happens now?" I asked. "Playtime's over, kid," Lester said. "We've got work to do. Help Maxie with these letters. We've got to get them out or we'll go broke." "What are these for?" I took one of the letters off of Maxie's stack and read through it. "Do a lot of people send money?" I said. "Somebody's got to pay for all the food you go through every morning," Lester said. "Not to mention Bucky's lawyers," he added. "What?" I said. It had never occurred to me to wonder how Bucky's lawyers were being paid for. He certainly couldn't afford them, but I would have never guessed the Panthers were behind it. Lester grunted at me. "Top drawer, lick 'em and stick 'em." I pulled open the desk drawer. It was full of postage stamps. I took out a few sheets and then began separating them. Maxie met my eyes as she handed me a stack of stuffed envelopes. "Where was Stick going before?" I asked, trying to make conversation. She gave me a funny look, like I should already know. "Roy Dax? The auto shop?" Maxie nodded. "Someone's got to fill in for Bucky every shift, or Roy's going to hire someone else to take his place. Someone who won't quit when Bucky comes back." "Stick doesn't know about cars," I said. "Not like Bucky." "He must have learned." Maxie handed me another stack, and we stopped talking to concentrate. I licked stamps and envelopes until my mouth went dry. I paused and spent a few moments rolling my tongue around in my mouth, trying to bring life back to it. Maxie snickered. "You can just use the sponge, you know." I glared at her. "Now you tell me? Where is it?" I left it in the kitchen. She grinned and angled her head towards the other room. "Through there." I shot her one last dirty look as I walked into the other room. Stick and Leroy were sitting in low-backed armchairs, facing a bookcase that was filling one entire wall. Stick rubbed his forehead and leaned back in his chair. "I'm saying I don't think it's a good idea," he said. "And I'm saying you need to talk to Sam about it." Leroy drummed his fingers along the armrest. "Talk to me about what?" Stick sat up and turned. "Sam?" "Bucky's lawyers still want you to testify at the trial," Leroy said, tilting his head back toward me. I went around to the front of them. "Still? They never asked me." "Father said no," Stick said quietly, "and they respected him too much to go against him." Just like that, my fuse reignited. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Father wants me to help Bucky as much as I can. He said so." "There are plenty of witnesses," Sam, Stick said, glancing at Leroy. "He didn't want you to get any more involved than necessary." "But they still want me?" Leroy leaned toward me. "You're Roland Child's son. People know your name, and that means the jury might be more likely to believe your story." "I'll testify," I said. "I saw what happened, and Bucky doesn't deserve to go to jail." A muscle in Stick's cheek twitched. Leroy smiled. "Good. Now you have to just convince your father." "I don't need permission, do I?" "No," Stick said, "but if he asks them not to put you on the stand, they won't." "Just to make him happy, even if it's worse for Bucky?" "It's more than that," Stick said, and I waited for him to say more, hating the fact that I didn't know things. Leroy brushed his hands together. "Well, my work here is done," and he stood up and looked at Stick. "Help him figure out what to do to make this happen." Stick nodded. Leroy pressed my shoulder as he passed. "Make me proud, kid." Stick studied me for a few moments. "I know you'd do anything for Bucky," he said, "but this is a big step." "I can handle it. Why don't you want me to?" Finally, something I could do that Father and Stick could not. I was determined to be there for Bucky now, in any way that I couldn't help him on the street that day. He leaned forward. You have to understand what this means to tell what you know. It's the truth. I'll say the same as everyone else. Bucky didn't do it. Stick sighed. There is no one else, Sam. There are plenty of people, I said, but I knew what he meant. I swallowed the knot that formed in my throat. People are afraid to testify. It's a serious thing to stand up and say the cops are lying. Maxie's not afraid, I said. Did you ask her? Stick hesitated. Yes, she'll do it. Then I'll be there too. Don't decide because of Maxie. I'm not. I paused. The easy choice is almost never the right one, right? Father had taught us that. In the morning, I went back to the hospital. I took a deep breath and stepped into Father's hospital room. He was sitting slightly propped up in the bed, and Mama perched on the chair beside him, leaning in. They saw me. Sam, they said at the same time. Hi. I hung by the doorway. I didn't want to do this in front of Mama, but there was no good way to ask her to leave. She must have known what I was thinking because she stood up. I think I'm going to find some tea. She kissed my cheek as she passed. I moved closer to the bed, and Father watched me. What day is it? He asked. Friday. That's what I thought. Where should you be? For a second, I didn't know what he was talking about. Then I realized. School. Father sighed. That makes 3 days in a row that you've missed. I'm sure your teachers will understand, but no more, you hear? I nodded. I wanted to talk to you. I took a deep breath and plunged in. I've been asked to testify. He frowned. Who asked you? I didn't answer. He already knew. I'm going to do it. I said no and I meant it. Why didn't you tell me? I told Stephen not to get you involved in this. I told him. You're the one who talks about playing by the rules, about people working the system. You said I could help Bucky, but you didn't mean it, did you? You don't know how these people like I do, he said. You don't know. He struggled to sit up straight, but grimaced, and I moved closer to help him, and he leaned back against the pillows, breathing hard, and I sat on the edge of the bed. I think I do, I said, looking into Father's ashen face. That's what this is about. You are already visible because you are my son. This will put you... Don't you know I worry about you? He took my shoulders. Promise me, Sam. Promise me you'll never pick up another gun, no matter how angry you get. Father... He looked into my eyes. I need you to promise me, Sam. I need to hear you say you understand. I pulled away. Father tried to hold me, but I rose to my feet out of his reach. I could promise that he would believe me. I could say everything and it would be all right. And maybe it would be, but I didn't know for sure. Sam, the word rang like a chime in the silence, and the sound rippling out over me, over everything. I'm sorry, I whispered. He turned his head away. You tell your brother that if he comes home, you can testify. My heart skipped. He'll come home when Bucky does, I said. Mama and I brought Father home a few days later. Father and I sat quietly the whole way, listening to Mama chatter on about anything she could think of. As we pulled into the driveway, she finally ceased her endless monologue. The silence became huge. I helped Father out of the car and put his arm around my shoulder as we walked into the house. I could tell he was trying not to lean against me, but he had to, so he did. It was a long walk to the bedroom, but we got Father situated in the bed. I tried not to look into his eyes. Maybe all the things we'd left unspoken between us could remain that way. Mama returned to the car to retrieve a few items, leaving us alone, and Father seemed settled enough, so I headed for the door. Sam, the fragile silence shattered. Yes, I dropped into the chair near the bed. You're going through with it, then. Yes, we testify on Monday. I'm sorry you think it's the wrong thing. His face took a mix of surprise and pain. I don't. I sprang up. Then how could you say no without even asking me, after I told you what I saw? I want you to understand. No one thinks I understand anything. I paced along the foot of the bed. I get it, all of it. I do. Father gritted his jaw and levered himself up on his hands. And just what understanding led you to bring a gun in this house, to take your hand and threaten someone's life? His face paled a few shades, and he leaned back into his pillows, releasing several quick, shallow breaths. It wasn't even loaded. A thin layer of fury steamrolled over Father's face, smoothing his features. It wasn't even loaded, he repeated. Do you think that even? How can you? Have you learned nothing from me? I guess not, I said, knowing it would hurt him. I didn't know why I wanted to do that. The sadness in his eyes overwhelmed me, and I walked out of the room.